Hello and welcome to the Small Agency Talk Show. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of the Small Agency Growth Alliance, or SAGA. And I'm here today, and what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about technology when working from home, because this is something that a lot of agencies are dealing with these days, and particularly as a lot of agencies are thinking about having a longer term, either hybrid or fully remote setup, thinking about how you and your team are using technology, how you're getting the most out of the performance for everything that you're doing, and how you make sure that you avoid the risks of technology when working from home. So let's go ahead and get into the show. All right, so as we're thinking about working from home, which we're all doing, I'm in my home right now, and we are always figuring out how we can do things better. And so a couple of the things that I want to talk about today, and I'd love to hear your own experiences, your own questions. And of course, I'm happy to take questions on other agency topics as well over the course of the half hour that we have together, because it's Friday and that's what we do, open Q&A, along with whatever comes to mind as I go along. And so the things I want to talk about are things like how you work with your team on making sure that they've got the right equipment. What are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about from a financial and a risk perspective? How can you help make sure that your team has the best internet connection possible? We're all doing these video calls and other things that require more and more bandwidth, and I am still a year into this new work from home setup. I'm still hearing from lots of folks that they're having problems with their home Wi-Fi. And I've got some tips on that, because some of you may know I'm a little bit of a tech geek and have probably spent a little bit too much time and money over the years testing out all sorts of different gear for myself. I also want to talk about backups, and we had a World Backup Day or something like that this week. Ironically, it was a day where I had a massive system failure where one of my backups didn't work. So that was in part one of the inspirations for today's topic. And so we'll talk about that and some of the things that you want to be thinking about for you and your team. And then finally, if we have some time, we'll talk a little bit about some of the collaboration tools that folks use to make working from home and working remotely a whole lot more convenient. So let's go ahead and we will start by, let's start with the backup thing, because that's really been my heartburn for the past few days, because as you know, I do a lot of video and other things that require a lot of storage space. So I have what's called network attached storage, or a NAS server here at my house, and it's a place where I store backups of different things. I store the videos that I'm working on editing, the footage that I create, all those kinds of things. So I've got a good library of content, and it's pretty big. And earlier this week, I had gotten actually an upgrade from my ISP. They had reached out and said, we're upgrading you to a higher level of service. We need to send you a new cable modem so that you can access this higher level of service. And in the process, I also needed to make some upgrades to my home network, because the new service was going to be 1.2 gigabits of download speed, but standard home network cabling or office network cabling is 1 gigabit. Fortunately, I have some network equipment in my house that is higher than that, but I needed to tie it all together. So I added one small piece of hardware, easy peasy, no problem, shouldn't have caused any issues. It caused some issues. It caused me to lose complete access to my NAS server, and in the process of trying to fix it, I had an oopsie where I hit the wrong button, and I was rushing, I wasn't thinking, I just wanted to get back to regular work, and oopsie, I managed to wipe out the configuration of my server. Unfortunately, it turns out that the configuration file was about the only thing that wasn't properly backed up. So much to my dismay, I have had to rebuild the full configuration of the server, which took quite a bit of time. I'm not quite done with it yet, but at least I have access to the data itself. But so why do I tell you this? Because you probably don't have a NAS in your home. You probably don't need a NAS in your home. But you do need to be thinking about how you are backing up your files and how your agency is handling backups of all of the files that you and your team collaborate on. And for many of you, you may say, well, I've got my content on Dropbox, I'm all set. And that's fine. Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, these are all great places. And generally speaking, it's pretty good. It's good to have a backup there, but it's not foolproof. You should still be looking to have other backups in other places. And this is particularly true for any files that you're sharing among your team, because while you can go back and get past versions of files and things like that if something happens, you really want to be protected against the possibility that a disgruntled team member does something on their way out the door, or someone has their computer get infected and it causes massive wide-scale damage to the files that you're all sharing together because you have shared access to some of those accounts. So I would still strongly encourage you to have some sort of a backup plan. My personal favorite is a service called Backblaze. And Backblaze, I think it costs $5 or $6 a month to back up your computer no matter how many files you have stored there. So it's a great, affordable option. It happens all in the background. You don't notice it. You can use it for your laptop. You can use it for your desktop. It works just seamlessly. You basically just sign up for the account, install the software, and you don't have to think about it again until and unless something goes wrong. And fortunately, I have had it in place when I've had things go wrong on my personal computer, and I've been able to restore the files with relative ease. So that's the kind of thing where if you've got that set up on your computer, let's say you've got Dropbox or OneDrive or something, and it's storing all the files locally on your computer, you then have a couple of different backups. You've got the one that you're doing through Backblaze, but you've also got whatever the service itself is doing. So this is a really great thing for you to have to make sure that your agency's files, your client work, whether you're talking about design files or press releases or media lists, or any of those kinds of things, have backups, have places where you can go and get them if you need them. So it's real peace of mind. And generally speaking, when it comes to backups, folks recommend, the experts do, a 3-2-1 strategy. So the idea is that you should have 3 different copies of every single piece of data that you have. And it should be on at least 2 different devices, and at least one of those should be somewhere other than your primary location, so outside your work or home. And so something like Backblaze helps you have that remote offsite storage. Having things stored on your computer, plus Backblaze, plus Dropbox, OneDrive, etc., you've now managed to hit 3 different locations for it. And so this is the kind of thing that will help you if something happens. And most people I know have had a situation where they've lost files at some point or had problems with access or they needed to go back to an old version. So if you've got this in place, it's really going to help you out. So I strongly encourage you to look at your backup strategy. And while this is not a tech show, this is really important for making sure that your key files are protected. And think about the ones that you may not access as often, things like financial records. You want to make sure that you've got backups of those, and don't just assume because it's in the cloud that's enough. It's still a good idea to, if you've got cloud services like QuickBooks or something like that, download files periodically so you've got additional copies that you can access if you need them. Also keep in mind that these are things that can be really helpful in the event that your computer gets infected with ransomware. And I know a number of organizations in the last few years who have been hit with ransomware, and that's where this virus gets on your computer, it locks up your files, and the only way that you can unlock them is to pay a hacker, usually in Bitcoin or something like that, that's very difficult to trace, and then they will theoretically unlock your files. Well, that's not a great solution. First of all, it costs you a lot of money. Secondly, it's a risk because who knows? I mean, if they're a scam artist, are they really going to care whether they actually fulfill their promise to unlock your files or not? The reality is most of the folks I know who were in that situation and did pay, they did get their files unlocked. But you never know. So having access to backups can be helpful in all sorts of different scenarios. And you want to make sure that as an agency, you're working with your team so that your team members know what the standards are. How long do you want to store things? Do they have to make sure that all of their files are stored in shared access so that they can be backed up and so that people on the rest of your team have access to them. This is important not just for if an employee leaves, but I mean, let's say that an employee has a family emergency and is not available to send you a file. If they're not being stored in a shared access kind of area, you can lose the access and you can lose time that may be critical to servicing your clients appropriately. So make sure that you're creating the systems and processes so that your team is set up to do these things so that they help you with both short-term and longer-term bigger crises. So that's all something that you want to be thinking about when you're thinking about storage of your data, storage of your files, backing them up, and making sure that they are all in good shape. And this is something we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about when we were all working in offices, because we could have computers where we shared files there, or maybe in the old days we all had desktop computers. So if someone was out, you simply asked for their password, you got onto their computer, and you could download whatever you needed. So think about these things and make sure that you're planning in advance for the things that might happen so that you can be prepared. But now we're at home. We're talking about things like backups, but we also have to think about things like Wi-Fi speeds. And I'm using Wi-Fi speeds in an inappropriate, incorrect context because really it's the way that most people who are non-technical talk. The reality is that Wi-Fi is just the connection between the router in your home and your laptop computer or desktop computer. And most people get confused about what's Wi-Fi, what is their ISP's internet access, what are other things that may be slowing things down. And so there are a lot of different pieces to this puzzle, and it gets very confusing. So let me try to simplify it a little bit, because we all need to be focused on this. It's, again, we're not in an office space where we've got commercial internet access, where maybe we've got high speeds, it's all wired together, we plug into an Ethernet cable at our desks, and we're getting just that nice high-speed internet that we all love, and it makes things like video like this much easier to do. At home, we have Wi-Fi, and most people start out with whatever device their ISP, whether it's the cable company or the phone company or whomever, gives them. So in my case, I use Xfinity by Comcast, and so they provide you with one device that is a cable modem and router and Wi-Fi access point all in one. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of folks get confused about things and they say, well, that my Wi-Fi is bad, when they really mean their internet speeds. And so this one device, it connects to a coaxial cable. Some places, if you've got higher speed access, you may have a fiber cable. There's a few different ways that folks are connecting. But in any case, it comes into this device, and then you get this wireless signal that goes around the house, and it goes to connect up all of your devices, whether it's your phone, your iPad, your laptop, your desktop, your printers, all of those different things, and it brings it together in a network so that you can all share access to the internet as needed. Now, the problem is that these devices that you get from your ISP, your provider, they're not great. They work okay, but they're in one location, and depending upon where you place that in your house, you may or may not have good access in your home office or your dining room or your kitchen table or wherever it is that you're working. And so some of the things that you want to be thinking about when you are talking about having poor performance, maybe your Zoom calls are dropping regularly, maybe it's taking too long to load a website. Think about where you are in reference to the location of that device. And if it's going through a lot of walls before you get to it, so if you say, okay, it's over in that room and there's 2 walls between me and that device from my cable company or whomever, you know it's going to be slowed down as it's going through those walls. So you can address this in a bunch of different ways. My favorite way to do it is by actually connecting Ethernet cables to my laptop or my desktop. That's how you're going to get the best speed. And so if you're in the same room as your Wi-Fi device, I would encourage you, plug it in with an Ethernet cable. Most of these devices have extra ports on the back, and so you can do that. You can get little dongles, these little adapters that will connect a USB port on your computer to an Ethernet cable, or maybe you already have a laptop that has an Ethernet port on it. That's going to be the way you get your best performance. You're not going to have weird call drops for the most part. You're going to get good video quality, and everybody's going to be happy. But if you're not in the same room as that device, how do you solve that? Well, you can still stay with the wired side of things, and there are all sorts of devices you can use around your home. And I actually created a video about this not too long ago because I actually wired a lot of my house using two different kinds of devices. One is called a power line Ethernet adapter, and that just plugs into an electrical outlet, and it uses the electrical wiring in your home to make connections that then can be translated into that Ethernet cable. So it works in a lot of houses. For technical reasons, it doesn't work in all of them, and it may not work perfectly, but it does work. And it is a kind of thing where for 50 or 60 bucks, you can get some of these adapters and start getting wired access in more points in your home. And again, wired is the gold standard for getting the speeds that you're being promised by your ISP. The second thing that you could do is you can get something called a Mocha adapter, and that's what I've relied upon mostly in my own home. And that turns the coaxial cable jacks in our homes into Ethernet ports. And it's just a little adapter, you plug it in, and all of a sudden you've got full speed internet coming through those cables in whatever room you want them in. And since many of us have homes where we have these cable outlets in a lot of different places, we can take advantage of that and have that high speed internet access. Of course, you can have someone run the Ethernet cable throughout your home by pulling new cables through the walls. If you've got a really new home, you may already have these things wired in, and so it may just be a matter of making the appropriate connections in your basement or wherever your connection comes in from the ISP so that it makes all those jacks live, and so that's worthwhile to do if you can. But let's say that wiring isn't something you want to do. You just want to improve the wireless. Maybe you like to roam around so much that you don't want to have to plug your laptop in. Well, in those cases, what you might want to look at is a Wi-Fi system in your home, often called a mesh network, although it's not always the most accurate term, but let's call it mesh for now, which means that you basically got different Wi-Fi access points throughout the home that allow you to have stronger wireless connections in a variety of different places. So instead of worrying about the signal traveling through a bunch of walls to get to your computer, you can have these different Wi-Fi pods or access points around the home that will allow you to have improved speed. None of them are as good as having direct wired access, but they're certainly better than just having that one device provided by your ISP sitting in one location in the home. So those are a bunch of different suggestions. I could go on and on about the other things that you can do, but hopefully that gives you some ideas as to how you can improve the Wi-Fi performance so that you can make sure that the work you're doing with your team, the work that your team members are doing with each other, that you're doing with clients, that you have the best performance possible. So it makes that work from home, that remote work setup as seamless as possible. But what other things might you want to be thinking about as an agency leader when it comes to the technology in your employees' homes? You need to be thinking about the tools that you're providing them. And so particularly if you're an agency that's looking at moving towards from an in-office to a remote setup in the coming months, or you're looking to have more of a hybrid setup, what are your policies going to be for buying hardware for people to use at their home? If they need to have better Wi-Fi access, are you going to pay for it? Are you going to subsidize it? What about if they need to have more bandwidth at their home, so they need to upgrade their account with their ISP so that they're getting more upload and download bandwidth so they can do video calls and things like that? How will you handle that? Again, you should think about subsidizing that or even just straight up paying for it. You should be thinking about all of the different devices and tools that they need to do their jobs effectively. Are you going to invest? I was talking with an agency not too long ago who was investing in high-quality video cameras and microphones for their team members because they were doing so much of this remote video work that they wanted to make a better impression on clients. And so those are investments that you may want to make, particularly if you're planning on staying all or partially remote for the foreseeable future. You then need to think about some of the risks that go along with that. What happens if some of that equipment is damaged? What happens when the employee leaves, either voluntarily or otherwise? How do you get it back? How do you recoup any costs? Or do you just write it off as cost of doing business? You want to make sure that you are talking with your insurance company to make sure that if you need to list remote workers' addresses to make sure that the equipment that they have is covered, or that things that might happen to them from a work perspective in their homes is covered, you should certainly be having those conversations and making sure that you've addressed that. Because very frequently, when you have employees who work from home, your business insurance company is going to want to know those addresses so that they can list them on the policy. And if something happens to equipment or employees in other locations, you may or may not be covered. So make sure that you're addressing those risks in advance. You need to think about things like how you do maintenance of computers, right? So if people are working remotely, how do you troubleshoot? And that's something that fortunately is a whole lot less of a problem than it was when I first started working in my first agency 26, 27 years ago. But you still have some support needs, and how are you going to do that? And how has that changed when people can't just bring a computer into the office and transfer it out? Are you going to, if you've got a team of 10 people, are you going to carry an extra laptop that you hold on to that you can either have someone come to you to get, or that you will ship to them if they need something on a moment's notice? These days, a lot of folks are finding that it's difficult to buy laptops or computer components on very short notice, so it becomes more important to potentially stockpile maybe old ones. So maybe once you get an employee a new laptop, you're holding on to the old ones in a central location so that you can easily hand them out again if you need to. These are all things that you want to be thinking about, because you need to maximize the quality of the employee's experience working from home, and also make sure that they're able to do their jobs very effectively for clients. You need to be thinking about some of the collaboration tools that you're using with your team members. And I'd love to hear, for those of you who are listening, first of all, I can't tell that you're listening if you don't comment, so I'd love if you did comment. But if you have suggestions for tools that you've used for collaboration and you find to be effective, that would be fantastic, because there are so many different ones out there. I'm going to talk about a few here in just a moment. But really, it's a matter of finding out what the right fit is for you and your team and the work that you're doing. For example, a lot of development firms will prefer to use tools that use what's known as the Kanban style for project tracking, which is, if you think about it sort of in more traditional terms, it's basically putting Post-it notes in different columns on a physical board. And when you do that, you have the ability to sort of move things from this is my to-do list, these are the things in progress, these are the things waiting for approval, and these are the things completed. And obviously the columns can be different based on your needs, but those are very popular for creative and web development firms that have things that work through those defined processes. But that may not work for every agency. Other agencies may want collaboration tools that are more focused on creating a virtual whiteboard experience. Some may just be interested in having something like the Google Suite that has documents and spreadsheets and those kinds of things that allow you to have shared access. You can jointly edit documents very easily, so it's not like the old days where you had to email the Microsoft Word file back and forth and say, okay, do I have the right version? Is this the right version? Oh, I edited this and Sally edited this. Now I've got to sort of consolidate the edits in one place. Google Docs, Google Sheets allows you to have one central location where you can share that editing access, and it's in real time, so that you don't have those challenges where some human has to sort out the differences in those different versions. And Google Docs, the Google Suite of services, is very popular in the agency community. If you're not using that, you're probably using Office 365. It has a lot of similar functionality as well. Whatever it is, you probably need some sort of core productivity suite that is shared amongst your team, and so those would be the two places you start. But then there's project management tools. I'm personally very fond of Asana. I think it is a great tool for collaborating with teams. You can have different roles. People have different access to projects. You can even allow clients to have access to some things so that you're able to do the necessary collaboration. Everybody can see what tasks are outstanding, what projects are at what stage, and it gives you all of that ability. You can put comments in there, you can do attachments, so you can say, okay, here's the wireframe, let's work from this, or here's the media list, this is what we're sending out the targets to, or here's the background information you need to write this press release. all of those things can be done in tools like Asana, but there are other ones. Trello, for example, extremely popular. I've used that, and again, that's typically more of the Kanban style format I was talking about earlier, and allows you to follow that sort of methodology. So I've liked that when I've been working on those kinds of sequential type projects that really benefit from that kind of a structure. You need to be thinking about what kind of CRM tools you're using. And you probably already have some that are in place, but I like Pipedrive. Copper's another one that's very popular. HubSpot has a free CRM tool that works pretty well. And so these are useful not just for tracking your business development, which is what most people think of, but particularly as you have distributed teams, it can be a useful way for tracking information about clients. So you can use it as a way to share information about all of your client contacts. It's a central repository where if you need to reach out to someone on the client's team for approval or because of a crisis or something like that, you can have this shared access. And it's oftentimes better having something like that than a shared spreadsheet, which doesn't collect the information in quite as neatly packaged a format. And so if you think about using these CRM tools for things beyond sales, you may get some real benefits out of it. They can be really helpful if you do influencer marketing, for example, media relations. All of those things can be tracked in CRM tools so that perhaps you have one central person database, if you will, as a business, as an agency, instead of having to have one thing that you use for sales, another one that you use as your media database, another one that you use as your influencer tracking tool. Bringing it all together can be quite a time savings and also allow you to get through some of those blurry lines that exist in many of these areas today. Ultimately, when it comes to all of these tools, the most important thing is just to find the ones that you actually use. Because if a Google Sheet is actually what you're going to use on a day-to-day basis and everybody's comfortable with it and so everybody uses it, that's fine. You don't have to worry about picking out a tool with all the bells and whistles. This is not about having the coolest demo with a salesperson or the greatest video that you see on YouTube that shows the product in action, what can be done. This is about what you're actually doing with it. And as we're all doing more remote work and collaboration with clients who are not in our immediate area and we're not able to get together in person, all of these tools allow us to reduce the friction, increase the flow of information, and hopefully improve the results. So that brings me near to the end of the time that we have here together today. I've tried to cover a lot of ground, but this technology stuff was just on my mind this week, as I say, because I managed to screw up my own computers and mess up my own backup structures, and believe me now, those files that I didn't have that were not backed up correctly are now being backed up about 7 different ways and 7 different places. So that particular problem, I feel pretty confident in saying will ever happen again. But think about these things. Think about how you can work with your team to make them more effective. You can up their technology game so that the results that they're producing for your agency, for your clients, is better. Think about the things that are pain points for you and try to figure out how technology can be your friend instead of your enemy. Don't fight the technology. Figure out how to make it bend to your will, because that really is what technology is there for. It's there to be a helper. And it's not the kind of thing where you want to just accept that, the Wi-Fi is what it is. I'm going to complain about it, but there's nothing I can do. There are things you can do, and I would encourage you to do them. I would encourage you to look at both the benefits in improving things as well as some of the risks that may exist, particularly as you're working in a more remote or hybrid work structure. So hopefully this has all been helpful to you. I look forward to our next time together next Friday at noon Eastern Time. Next week will not be a solo episode. I have some panelists with me next week, so we'll have a nice free-flowing conversation. I thank you for joining. I hope you have a great weekend and a great week ahead, and I will talk to you next week.